Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 295, On the Edge, Stranger in a Strange Land. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I will continue with On the Edge, Stranger in a Strange Land. Here, I look at the imaginary territories and, well, I'll tell a story of sorts with Nyes, a member of the Eastside, who, as an agent, goes over to the West Side to try to attract new members to the East Side. It's an interesting adventure. There are some problems along the way, but eventually everything works out. Anyway, today's background footage will be of Little Bradley Falls Trail and Cove Creek Trail. These trails are located in Saluda, North Carolina. Saluda is south of Asheville, North Carolina, on I-26. So, from Asheville, take I-26 east to the Saluda exit. At the bottom of the ramp, turn left. I think it's like Holcomb Bridge Road. I forgot the name of it. But anyway, you just take a left at the end of the ramp and follow that road for maybe about 3.5 miles. And you'll come to an area near a field in a creek. And there'll be a couple of pull-offs. You'll often see cars pulled off there. If you go to the left, it's a short hike to a nice little waterfall. If you go up to the right, the trail follows a nice stream. And the stream, well, eventually crosses into some private property, and the trail, I guess, wanders into some subdivision or something like that. I didn't quite get that far. That's about when I turned around. So, now let's continue with On the Edge, Stranger in a Strange Land. Oops, it looks like I goofed. We will continue with I Am the East Side. Here, I look at my personal philosophy, which goes back all the way to when I was 14 years old. Then it's on to On the Edge, Stranger in a Strange Land. So, now let's continue with I Am the East Side. All of this corruption and greed is exposed, as well as all the methods of deception to concentrate power for corporations, or to concentrate power for a certain religion, or even for a certain government. All of that is revealed. So no government, no religion, no corporation has an advantage over the other. The level playing field prevails. Then, people who are disadvantaged suddenly have opportunity. People who are disenfranchised are no longer. They are able to express themselves, express their ideas, express their creativity, and they have more free time to do so. And economic and other situations are much better for them because we work to create the change, to make things happen in this way, to give the disadvantaged more of an advantage. So everyone joins together to create this positive change. and the east side becomes dominant. So, perhaps there's another way to think about all this. A little more simplistic approach, I guess. I know I make things so darn complicated. In reality, it's even more complicated than I describe, of course. Sure it is. I can't think of everything, you know. But let's get things more simple instead of more complicated. Let's make life a game. A relatively simple game. So, if life is a game, then what is the purpose of that game? Sure. Is the purpose of the game of life to deceive and win? Or is it to reduce deception? If you reduce deception, your personal advantage in the game might also be reduced. But are you happy with that? To allow all to advance equally? Or do you see the purpose of the game of life simply as to deceive others and gain as much an advantage as possible? If that's the case, you're the west side. If you want to reduce deception and possibly your personal financial advantage and maybe even your advantage for finding the appropriate life partner, if you're willing to reduce that to allow all the equal opportunity to advance, well, then you're more of the east side type. Life is a mission. Don't forget that. And as long as you believe you haven't completed your mission, you will live. Sure, I guess that means perhaps for all eternity. But to be practical about things, you add the longer to the end. So you say, life is a mission. As long as you believe you haven't completed your mission, then you will live longer. Sure, I really believe this. It's one of the core aspects of the East Side philosophy. You really are on a mission with all this, and you really are associated with these imaginary territories, whether you believe it or not. It's okay, it's just the way things are. Sure. So, the obvious purpose of life is the mission of the East Side. To use knowledge, to expose deception, use to concentrate wealth. You use detection of deception and detection of concentration of wealth, like in the TV show Heroes. Sure, you try to preserve native culture, enforce human and environmental rights. 4. Perhaps one day it might be like that. Perhaps something like Heroes, the TV show, might come to be, and certain people might have certain powers. You just never know. But I'm assuming it will kind of be like that on Northeaster's Day, when, well, suddenly deception will be revealed, and people will be able to feel and sense it. Sure, and this might all be done through some miraculous power. Anyway, sure. I hope you have enjoyed this section of The Casey Waters Show. Now, it is time for On the Edge, Stranger in a Strange Land. Here, I look at what it would be like for someone from the imaginary territories on the east side to take a small group of friends and venture deep into the west side imaginary territory. This is fantasy fiction material of my own creation. So the main character name is Nize. I guess that's spelled Nize. Anyway, so Nize takes a few of his friends and they're getting ready to venture into the West Side imaginary territory. They're from the East Side and they're used to being in the East Side. They're comfortable with it. But now it is time to venture to the West Side. Well, the reason why there's these exploratory journeys, well, it's more than exploration. It's also a diplomatic exchange of sorts. It's touchy diplomacy. In theory, the East Side and West Side are at war. But in other aspects, they have to cooperate. So it's kind of a touchy, delicate diplomacy. Anyway, so Nize and his friends are going to go deep into the West Side. But in addition to this diplomatic work, of course, maybe they might be able to win over a few West Side people to become members of the East Side and associate with the East Side imaginary territory. To do this, they would have to change their value systems and adapt their value systems to that of the East Side. Well, anyway, so I guess with this diplomatic exchange, well, if you're from the East Side and you're in the West Side, well, in theory, everyone in the West Side would know you were there. Because typically only West Side people are associated with the West Side imaginary territory, and vice versa. If a West Side person was in the East Side people would readily know. But anyway, so they're getting ready to go. So it's time for the great send-off. Sure. So, it's kind of like going down a great parade. Well, I guess Nice and his friends are kind of floating over the parade. After all, these are the imaginary territories, so basically anything you think of can happen, sure. So they float over this grand parade as everyone's waving and cheering them on, wishing them luck on their journey. So, they float over the Economic Justice Building, where economic theories and ways of doing things are created and implemented. Well, here on the East Side, well, everything's geared towards helping the most amount of people possible, to help everyone have equal access to all benefits and knowledge, sure. And also to avoid wealth concentration, at least excessive wealth concentration, to have everything geared so people who are the poorest have the most ability to advance economically, and that they are provided with extra money so they could spend it and stimulate the economy. Sure. So there's this kind of sense of help out the poor. But of course that only could go so far, and then it becomes unfair on the wealthy and everyone else. A delicate balance is struck here at this Economic Justice Center. Anyway, they continue on their journey, flying over the Eastside imaginary territory. Occasionally, they might get bumped around and perhaps shot across the a portion of the imaginary territory rapidly, like being shot out of a cannon. They're going through these explosions of sorts. The East Side is very powerful and it likes to show off what it could do. And so Nyes and his friends are kind of flying through these explosions, not being harmed by them, perhaps flying just above them, but enough to feel them, be bounced around by them, and perhaps propelled by them, but not deafened by them. Perhaps sound waves don't travel readily in the imaginary territories, or perhaps they have ear protection. So, Nyes and his friends wander beyond the east side into the central region. Well, at first they're on the central region close to the east side, so things are relatively okay. There's a little deception and greed here and there, but nothing too outrageous. But as they wander deeper and deeper into the central region, they become more comfortable. Not just with the situation around them, but with Nyes' instructions. Nyes is telling his friends, "Oh, let's split up. It's easier to get things done. We could be perhaps more efficient that way. And, most important, we'll be less able to be detected and thus could stay in the West Side longer and get more accomplished, perhaps attracting more members." See, Nyes and his friends are agents. Agents are people who temporarily acquire the values of a different imaginary territory. And while they're in that imaginary territory, they might enlighten others about the values that they once had. To be in the West Side, they actually have to become the West Side. So Nyes and his friends actually have to become greedy and shallow and deceptive. And they're not familiar with this. And it's very awkward and very uncomfortable. And yes, they do have to, quote, put on a straight face and try to do this as smoothly as possible and try to fit in, even though it seems almost impossible. Yes, this is a difficult mission. Most people on the east side don't want to do it, and Nyes didn't feel particularly up to it either. But he decided to do it anyway. If you fare well on these type of missions, well, other people appreciate you more, perhaps both on the east side and the west side. And it could help you, well, it could help your overall situation. You could perhaps gain more power and influence. Sure, the east side craves that too. But they just want to do it through the most honest ways they could possibly think of and not have deception and greed getting in the way, but rather gaining power and influence to help others and, well, to promote their values. Well, I guess there's many variations on the east side. Sure there are. And there's many variations on the west side and the central region. All of this is extremely diverse and complicated, as Nyes and his friends are finding out as they go farther and farther from home, so to speak. Well, it gets more and more awkward, more and more uncomfortable, and Nyes is persisting that they split up and try to communicate with each other less. if possible, for sometimes even that could be detected. Try to be autonomous, Nye says. Well, so what it is there's a talent exchange program, and that allows you to instantly gain talents of those around you in the imaginary territories. So, when Nyes and his friends are at home in the East Side, this is all, well, it's all fun and easy and familiar. You could, well, if you're not that smart in one area, you could tap into the brains of another, so to speak, and learn detailed knowledge of engineering or of finances or of government administration or of union laws or other things, whatever might be relevant. Perhaps sometimes you would even learn personal history of people to help you influence them. As I said, the imaginary territories interact with us in reality, and we, in reality, interact with them. So they help us out, and we help them out, so to speak. Sure. So, both the East Side and the West Side, I guess, are constantly pulling at us, trying to influence us in their direction. And it is up to us to decide where it is best to go. Sure, so often we change a bunch. We're in the central region. Well, as we go back and forth between the East Side and the West Side, well, we are agents of sorts. And we adapt to the values of the territory we're in, of course, by definition, but at times we might show people in that imaginary territory glimpses of where we are from. We're trying to attract members, people who would stay in our imaginary territory in a more permanent way. Well, to the central region, this is not necessarily that important, but pretty much by definition, people in the central region are really good agents, and they could smoothly go between the East Side and the West Side. But they just don't care about drawing people from the West Side to the East Side that much, or from the East Side to the West Side. Now, people in the East Side and the West Side, well, when they go to the opposite imaginary territory, it is a more rare event and it is more awkward for them. But it also has higher stakes for them, for they really are trying to attract members. Remember, it's all a numbers game. The East Side wants more people in it, and the West Side wants more people in it. The Central region, well, is kind of a transition zone between the two, where in fact most people reside. Anyway, well, the Central region doesn't necessarily have a big campaign trying to attract new members. I guess it doesn't need to. As I said, most people are there anyway. Back to Nyes and his friends. So they're going in the West Side. Well, as I said before, in the East Side, they could use their talent exchange program and they could help promote, well, wealth equality and equal access to knowledge. They might help people find the right life partner for them that has the right personality for them and is well suited for them. Sure. But anyway, or they might want to specialize in communication and broadcasting, so to speak, a way to send out their message remotely. That way they don't have to leave the East Side and they could just broadcast to the West Side, just like the West Side broadcasts to the East Side. course, we're kind of immune to that if we're really set in the imaginary territory we're in. If we're in the central region, we listen to these broadcasts more readily and or influenced them by them more readily. And we get more confused more readily in the central region because we are fickle. And this is where most people are. Anyway, so Nice and his friends go across the long central region and they finally make it to the west side. Well, things start to get a little serious here. Now we start to really get in the thick of it, so to speak. We're getting into the main part of the mission. So, they have to really be deceptive and want to be deceptive and want to be greedy and want to exploit others and climb the social ladder without regard to the consequences to others. It's their own gain that matters, not everyone else's. So even though it's awkward and weird, Nyes and his friends must adopt these values of the West Side and be totally for themselves and be a real social climber and a real gold digger. Anyway, and be nice and deceptive about it. Sure. So, they do their best, and as they wander deeper and deeper, well, it just seems to get crazier and more awkward. There's all this deception going on. Deception on top of deception. It's just so darn cutthroat. And it just seems to amount to nothing. I mean, there's no real long-term goal here. It's just kind of chaos. Each one out for their own gain. Sure. Where the Eastside, well, they try to help everybody out. So you're kind of looking out after a lot of people and trying to spread your knowledge to them. Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Photography, John Blackwell. Email us at caseywaters2@caseywaters.com or call 828-808-4265.